So good evening. First, I would like to thank Pastor Jimenez and Brother Stucky for allowing me to preach to you tonight. You are there in Second Kings chapter number 1, but the part of the chapter that we'll be focusing is starting in verse number 17 until the end of the chapter, where the Bible reads, So he died according to the word of the Lord which Elijah had spoken. And Jehoram reigned in his stead in the second year of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, because he had no son. Now the rest of the acts of Ahaziah, which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And the title of this sermon tonight is The Two Jehorams and the Two Ahaziahs. The Two Jehorams and the Two Ahaziahs. If you noticed in this chapter, especially in verse number 17, it mentions here two Jehorams, and the person who died, the king, was Ahaziah. And also, there is another Ahaziah. So I think that would be a good sermon title. So I kind of made some points and made a sermon about it. So basically tonight we'll be looking into the kings of Judah and Israel. So it's quite, tedious opening this chapter, especially about the reigns, about the names, their mother's name, something like that, and how long did they reign in their particular reign in their kingdom. Okay, so especially with the kings after the reign of Jehoshaphat and Ahab. Okay, it is interesting, as I mentioned earlier, that these kings have the same names, and also they reigned at almost the same period of time. So they kind of have overlap within each other. So that makes it confusing sometimes when you're reading the Bible, especially in the book of the Kings. And he mentions Jehoram and another Jehoram reigned, and he mentions that he had no son. So you might thought that what? Wait a minute, did the king of Judah reign in Israel? Something like that. So we're gonna talking about that tonight. And if you got confused with that, well, I got confused with that when I was reading my Bible in the early days. But you know, cross-referencing with the book of the Chronicles would help us as well, and also with slowing down with your Bible reading would also help us. Not only they have the same names, but they are related legally because they got married, and also by blood since they have a nephew. Ahaziah, his nephew, is the same name, and Jihoram, he has Jihoram, which is his brother-in-law. So it's quite interesting. And also we're gonna have an application, especially for the side of the kings of Judah, since they are the remnant. And we obviously know that the kings of Israel got bad because of the fact of Jeroboam. But we're gonna find some lessons as well, especially in leadership and as a Christian. Okay, so turn if you would in Second Chronicles chapter number 18. Second Chronicles chapter 18. But first of all, before we go through with those kings, Jehorams and Ahaziahs, let's have a little bit of context when it comes to that period of time before we're gonna talk about them. So basically, if you remembered my sermon last time, so it's also in this section of the Bible where Elijah and Elisha. At this point, Elijah, as we read, is speaking with the king of Israel. So at this point, Elijah is still alive. So we're gonna talk about first about King Jehoshaphat. So King Jehoshaphat was the king in Judah, and then the counterpart will be Ahab in the kingdom of Israel. So before Jehoram and Ahaziah, king of Judah, reigned, their dad and their granddad Jehoshaphat reigned for that. So Jehoshaphat is a good king. The only thing that the Bible can complain about him is the high places were not taken down, so the people were still, burning incense in the high places. And his second fault, the major fault, is the result of this thing that we're gonna be talking tonight, is about Jehoshaphat making an allegiance with the king of Israel. So he made peace at this point. So you're there in Second Corinthians chapter number 18, starting in verse number 1. Now Jehoshaphat had riches and honor in abundance, and joined affinity with Ahab, And after certain years, he went down to Ahab to Samaria. So let's notice at this point, okay? In the other mentions of here, in the other mentions in the passages in the Bible, it says like, you know, Ahab directly talked to him to have a war with the king of Syria and Ramoth Gilead. But if we be focusing in Second Chronicles, it says that he went down to Ahab in Samaria. So Jehoshaphat is the one who went down to Israel at this point. Okay, let's continue. And Ahab killed sheep and oxen for him in abundance, and the people that he had with him, and persuaded him to go up with him to Ramoth Gilead. So so at this point they were talking like warring with against the king of Israel. And Ahab king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat king of Judah, Wilt thou go with me to Ramoth Gilead? So he asked him the question, and he answered him, I am as thou art, and my people as thy people, and we will be with thee in the war. So he made an allegiance with Ahab. So as we know the story, they get into war, and Jehoshaphat disguised himself. Sorry, it's Ahab though disguised himself. But Jehoshaphat also went into the war. Okay, so he is in his king's, apparel. So the armies of Syria thought that he was the king, but he was not the king because Ahab should be the leader of that war, disguised himself. So the armies came to him in Second Chronicles. Turn if you would in verse number 31. So this is the story where they're warring against the king of Syria. Second Chronicles chapter 18 in verse number 31. And it came to pass when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat that they said, It is the king of Israel. So they thought that Jehoshaphat was the king of Israel because he didn't disguise himself. Therefore they compassed about him to fight. But Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him, and God moved them to depart from him. So basically he was saved at that point. So he was compassed by the armies of Syria, but still he was able to get out of that situation because God helped him. So turn if you would in Second Chronicles chapter number 19. So even though that's a wicked thing that he did, he made an allegiance with the king of Israel. But since Jehoshaphat is a good man, so God was God did help him out of that trouble. So it reminds me, so while you're turning there in Second Chronicles chapter number 19, I will read to you Psalms chapter number 37. In verse number 33, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighted in his way. Verse number 24, though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with his hand. So even though he made that bad decision of making allegiance, still, since he's a good man, he is not he wasn't killed, and God did help him. So you're there in Second Chronicles. So this is the result of what happened after he made an allegiance and went to war with Ahab. So God did reprove Jehoshaphat in verse number 1 of Second Chronicles chapter number 19. And Jehoshaphat the king of Judah returned to his house in peace to Jerusalem. And Jehu the son of Hanani the seer went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, Shouldest thou help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? Therefore is wrath upon thee from before the Lord. Nevertheless, there are good things found in thee, in that thou hast taken away the groves out of the land, and hast prepared thine heart to seek God. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Bible has some good things to say about him, but the main pitfall of Jehoshaphat is that he made an allegiance with the king of Israel. So let's move on. So that's the introduction. So that's quite the context. So this story started with Jehoshaphat making allegiance with the king of Israel. So we can picture this out as saved individuals as well. So as we saved individuals, we are always in the world. We go out to the world, we preach the gospel. But there is a certain limitations to whom we can only have, relationships, as we say, not that the normal relationship like, you buy to the store, to the unbeliever, something like that, you make something transactions. But this one is quite different because, you're helping the wicked and the ungodly to wage war, okay? So that's a totally different thing. And another part of this is that one of his sons marries the daughter of Ahab. So you're making an allegiance. It's quite a practice in the olden times. If two kings would made an allegiance with each other, because obviously there would be uh, some secret intentions with comes to that allegiance. So what they do is like they have to marry their kids. So we have to marry this, so that the other king could prove the the trueness of his intention to the other kingdom. Like they're making an allegiance, something like that. So they have to marry the kids, the kings, the princes, or the prince of the other side. So let's go and see the first Jehoram who reigned in Judah. Okay, turn if you would in Second Chronicles chapter number 21. Second Chronicles chapter number 21. So this Jehoram, it's mentioned here. You're there in Second Chronicles chapter number 21, but I will read to you where we left off in Second Kings chapter number 1. It says, "So he died according to the word of the Lord, which Elijah had spoken, and Jehoram reigned in his stead in the second year of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah." So in Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, this is the one that we are going to talk to right now. So he reigned in in Judah for around 8 years. Second Chronicles chapter number 21, starting in verse number 1. Now Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, and Jehoram his son reigned in his stead. So this is the one that you're talking about, the king of Israel, Jehoram. And he had brethren, the sons of Jehoshaphat, Azariah and Jeiel, Zechariah, Azariah, and Michael, and Shephatiah. And these were the sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. And their father gave them great gifts of silver and of gold and of precious things, with fenced cities in Judah. But the kingdom gave he to Jehoram because he was the firstborn. So Jehoshaphat did follow the rules in the Bible, where were you giving the birthright to the firstborn, the kingdom. So he's the king. But turn, if you would, in Second Chronicles, just a few verses in verse number 20. Verse number 20. So this is his start of his reign. Okay, verse number 20. 32 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. And they parted without being desired, howbeit they buried him in the city of David, but not in the sepulchre of the king. So he reigned 8 years, he was 32. So basically he died at around 40 years old. So if you would reference this timeline, for example, in Second Kings chapter number 8, it mentions that in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, being then king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. 32 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. So it's consistent, like 32 and 8 years, but it mentions there that it's like in the 5th year of Joram, which is the other Joram. So this is the part that it makes it confusing. So if you ever went to the Kings and the Chronicles, you try to balance out the numbers. You try to make your own timeline. You sometimes notice that there's like 1 year or 2 years off within the range of the reign of those kings. Well, it's because of the fact, it's not a contradiction, but it's like there is a concept in the old days called the concept of co-regency or co-principality. Well, the concept of co-regency or co-principality is that the king had already appointed the next king, but the king is already alive. He's still alive, sorry. Still alive. So he's still reigning, and then his son or the next king is reigning also. So they are reigning at the same time. So the recorder might count that as an official or unofficial reign, something like that. And also the reigns, for example, he reigned in the 8th year, but it's in November. So you're off like 8 months or 9 months, something like that, if you total the years. Or it's the first year, but it's January 1st, something like that. Or January, within the month of January. So it's if you total those, if you have passed for about 10 years, something like that, then you'll be off by a year or something if you would total the months that had passed. So it's not really a contradiction. It's just because of the fact that co-regency existed in the Bible. For example, David, he was still alive, but Solomon, his son, has been ordained as a king, right? And also, if you remember Uzziah, one of kings in Judah, so he reigned, but he made this foolish thing, like he burned incense in the tabernacle, so he became leprous. So his son did reign for him because he was leprous. He wasn't able to perform the king's duty, but still he is the king. So that's the concept of co-regency in the Bible. Because sometimes the king dies and the people would select the son, something like that, to be the king, right? But in the case of co-regency, it's the king is still alive when that did happen. Okay, so let's move on. So that's his reign, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat. So he was chosen by their father. I mean, for the sake of record here, Jehoshaphat did gave inheritance to his sons. It's quite amazing that the Bible mentions this. And then he gave them cities, grapes of silver and of gold. And then it specifically mentioned that he gave the kingdom to Jehoram. So there's no question about that. So if you're the heir, you'd be happy. You know, you you have been given the power to reign in the kingdom, but Jehoram has his faults. So let's see what his fault is. Okay, turn if you would in you're still in the same chapter, but go to the verse number 6. Okay, so this is his fault. Okay, I mentioned earlier that they had their sons and their daughters got married. So this is one of his fault. Jehoram married Ahab's daughter. So her name was Athaliah. Second Chronicles chapter number 21 in verse number 6. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, like as did the house of Ahab, for he had the daughter of Ahab's wife, and he wrought that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord. So he basically married Ahab's daughter. Okay. So we don't know it. It is not mentioned when did he married, but I would assume that during the times that when Jehoshaphat made an affinity with Ahab, that that's when he married Ahab's daughter as well. Okay, so that's one of his fault. Another fault is in verse number 4. Verse number 4. Second Chronicles chapter number 21 in verse number 4. Now when Jehoram was risen up to the kingdom of his father, he strengthened himself and slew all his brethren with the sword, and divers also of the princes of Israel. Jehoram was 30 and 2 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. So that's what he did. So basically, Jehoram was really greedy in power. Even though the Bible did mention that his father had already given gifts to his brethren, they divided, giving them fenced cities, something like that. So it seems like he just want to have the power. Because if you're the king and then your brother also is still alive, he is still considered a prince in the kingdom. Okay, a powerful prince, for example. So he has, still have power because he can rule a certain province, something like that, if the king would allow him. But in this case is he killed all his brothers. So how wicked you have to be that you have to kill all his brothers, right? You already have the kingdom, you're already the king, and they can't run after you. It's because of the fact they already have their own fenced cities and they have their own inheritance. But still he killed his own brother. And I would assume that this would be one of the reasons, one of the effects that he married Athaliah. Because Athaliah, if you is familiar of her, you turn if you would in the next chapter, Second Chronicles chapter number 22, the chapter after that. Okay, so this woman Athaliah, being the daughter of Ahab, I don't really think that Jehoram really planned to kill his brother. What I think is that it's Athaliah's counsel. that made him to decide that he has to kill his brother. Because in Second Chronicles chapter number 22, this is what Athaliah did. Okay, in verse number 10, but when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal of the house of Judah. So he killed all the sons of Ahaziah. We're going to be talking about Ahaziah later. But what I was thinking is that he has all this plan, to kill all the king's sons that would reign in Judah. Okay, so that's what I would think. I would assume that for the reason why did Jehoram killed all his brother. Okay. Okay, so Joram is a wicked man. He killed his brother. Seems like reminds us with the son of Jerubbaal, who also killed all his brother, so that he could reign alone in during the reigns of the judges in Israel. Okay, so let's see what his end. Let's see what his end. So the end of his life, he has this really. If if like it's like watching a television series like when you're reading this story, he killed his brother, and when you learned what happened to him in the end, it's like, yeah, it seems like you have a vengeance to Jehoram in the end. So let's read this passage. Okay, it's quite long. Go back to chapter number 21. So let's see the end of Jehoram. In verse number 12. So let's gonna read this quick. And there came a writing to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of David thy father, because thou hast not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat thy father, nor in the ways of Asa king of Judah, but hast walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and hast made Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to go a whoring, like to the whoredoms of the house of Ahab, and also hast slain thy brethren of thy father's house, which were better than thyself. Behold, with a great plague will the Lord smite thy people, thy children, and thy wives, and all thy goods. And thou shalt have great sickness by disease of thy bowels, until thy bowels fall out by reason of this sickness day by day. Moreover, the Lord stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and the Arabians that were near the Ethiopians, and they came up into Judah and brake into it, and carried away all the substance that was found in the king's house, and his sons also, and his wives, so that there were never a son left him, save Jehoahaz the youngest of his sons. And after all this, the Lord smote him in his bowels with an incurable disease. And it came to pass that in the process of time, after the end of 2 years, his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness, so he died in sore diseases. And his people made no burning for him like the burning of his fathers. 30 and 2 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years, and departed without being desired. Howbeit they buried him in the city of David, but not in the sepulchres of the king. So the people didn't even give him a a burial. Like he is a king, so he is entitled to be buried in the sepulchres of the kings. But we can see here that the people didn't give him the burial of a king, because he buried him in the city of David, but not in the sepulchres of the kings. Okay. So that's what he's in. So he got incurable disease. So what I can't even imagine what kind of disease that is, that your bowels, would fall out of your body, right? So this is a really gruesome disease. But that's for the wicked, right? For the wicked people. So what we can see with this first king that we are looking into, Jehoshaphat. So you don't have to turn there, but please turn to 2 Kings chapter number 8. Within 2 Corinthians, I'll read to you 2 Corinthians chapter number 6 in verse number 14. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, with what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light for darkness. See, that's what I mentioned earlier, that, being as saved individuals, we are only limited to whom we could have these relationships. Okay, as mentioned, relationships, these close relationships like friends, something like that. There's no problem like having friends with the world, but with close relationships, something like this, it's different, because you have to be tied. Especially, he got married to the daughter Ahab, which gave him bad counsels. The Bible says that he made people He caused the people to go a whoring. He made Judah to be like the wickedness in the what they do in Israel with Ahab as the king. So that's the one that would happen if you ever go into that sin, or if you would mingle with the unbelievers or the wicked, especially in this kind of relationship. And also being greedy with power, right? We can say that we can't kill our brethren, but also as individuals, we are sinners, and we have the tendency to be greedy with power as well. Well, not in the sense like, we'll go to the extremes like killing our brothers, as I mentioned earlier, but also we can do some certain harms with our brethren as well. If, for example, powers, because people like to have power in church, for example, positions in the church, right? So people really have to have that position, and sometimes they are really willing to, talk bad about something so that they could take the position, something like that. So we should be careful with that sin as well, being greedy with power and all kinds of greed. So let's move on with the next king. Okay, so that's Jehoram, king of Judah. So another king, his son Ahaziah. Okay, so as we read earlier, the Arabians killed all his sons, so there's nothing left to him but only one son, who is the youngest, and this is Ahaziah. So you're there in 2 Kings chapter number 8, right? So in verse number 25, so this guy, Ahaziah, unfortunately, he only reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. So he has, there's not really much about him, but we can talk about the references about him. Okay, Ahaziah, king of Judah. So this one has another fault, but let's see his reign. He reigned 1 year. Okay, in the 12th year, in verse number 25, 2 Kings chapter number 8, in the 12th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, did Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. Okay, 22 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri, king of Israel. Okay, so he reigned only 1 year. So let's see what happened to King Ahaziah. Okay, so that's the markings of him. Okay, he is 22 years old, so he's a young guy, but unfortunately he reigned for 1 year, so he died around 23 or 24 years old. Okay, his mother's name was Athaliah. That's the daughter of Ahab. Don't be confused, because it mentions here he's the daughter of Omri, king of Israel. Omri is the grandfather of Athaliah, because Omri is the father of Ahab. Okay, that's the story about Israel. When the powers were being taken from the king, they are being slain by their servants, and then Omri is risen, and the people came with him, so he became the king. Okay, so they don't be confused about that thing. Okay, so in 2 Kings chapter number 9, so turn if you would one chapter later, in verse number 29. It's quite confusing as well in here. That's why I told you earlier about the concept of co-regency and co-principality in the Bible. Because in 2 Kings, if you will compare in 2 Kings chapter number 8, in verse number 25, it says he reigned in the 12th year of Joram. But in 2 Kings chapter number 9, verse number 29, it says that he reigned in the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab. Okay? So Ahaziah began to reign at that point. So as I mentioned earlier, since because of the fact that the the overlapping is sometimes in the first year, but it's in November, so you have some a little bit of discrepancy. But taking these accounts, he still did reign, and it's still viable evidence of him being king of Judah. Okay, so turn if you would. So keep your put a bookmark in 2 Kings chapter number 8. And turn to 2 Chronicles chapter number 22. Sorry, not second. Yeah, 2 Chronicles chapter number 2. So let's talk about his fault. Okay. So this is his reign, and what's the problem with this guy Ahaziah? So what he did wrong, or what's the circumstances that made him failure as a king in Jerusalem? Okay, 2 Chronicles chapter number 22 in verse number 3. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. So basically, it's Ahaziah is still in, Athaliah is still in power, so he's still giving counsel. When his husband died, then he's still giving counsel to his son Ahaziah. Okay. Wherefore he did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors. So not only his mother, but also the house of Ahab was his counselor. So imagine the kingdom separated, and then the kings of Israel were putting their ideologies in the kingdom of Judah. So basically, at this point, we can certainly say that Judah is still not departed from the Lord, right? But the king, but Israel is already departed long ago. So they're, whoredoms, idols, something like that. They're injecting in the kingdom of Jerusalem, in the kingdom of Judah. So we can see that this is right. Really, maybe they have already planned about this thing, or uh, since their mother, they killed the sons, and then they were telling this only son to do whoredoms and to do whatsoever the house of Ahab is doing in the other kingdom. Okay, he walked also after their counsel in verse number 5, and went with Jehoram the son of Ahab, king of Israel, to war against Hazael, king of Syria, at Ramoth Gilead, and the Syrians smote Joram. So basically, he saw that his dad went with Ahab to war with Syria, and God did reprove him. But at this point, he still went with war with, Joram at this point, because Ahab is already dead, and his dad is already dead. He repeated the same mistake that his dad has done. Okay? So turn back to 2 Kings chapter number 8. I hope you did put a bookmark in there. Another reference for his reign and his faults. Okay? 2 Kings chapter number 8 in verse number 27. And he walked in the way of the house of Ahab and did evil in the sight of the Lord, as did the house of Ahab, for he was the son-in-law of the house of Ahab. And he went with Joram the son of Ahab to war against Hazael, king of Syria, and Ramoth Gilead, and the Syrians wounded Joram. So basically, this is a parallel of 2 Kings chapter number 22. So this is his fault. Okay, so he made war, he made affinity with the king of Israel to make war with the Syrians, and also his counselor was his mother, which is a wicked lady, Athaliah, and also uh, the house of Ahab. So what we can see with this thing, okay. So we can see like the influence of a mom that she can do with the kids, okay. Because as a little child, maybe he was just a tender guy. He was 22 years old. So before that, maybe his mom has already given him counsel, but wicked counsels, as we can see in here. So this is one of the influences of a mother that she can give to his son. If the mother is wicked, then she can give wicked counsel to his son, and the son would do wicked things as well. Now, not only the mother, but also his, cousin, something like that, or the other guys who, at this point, maybe the people would just cross Israel and Judah. There's no boundaries at this point, because people, well, the king's sister is the queen of the other kingdom, so people can cross. Because before this, people can cross. They made boundaries, and they even made strongholds within the boundaries of Judah and Israel. But now people are crossing, as I would presume. That's why, wickedness from Israel could easily transfer to Judah. And how about you have a wicked counselor for the king as well? So that's a problem. And this is what we can see as saved individuals, the power of a mother which can give counsels to his son. A power of giving bad counsel, and also in the good side of raising a godly children. So it's a big responsibility for the mothers as well. Because, if we would see in the Bible, like a pattern, for example, for Solomon, he has Bathsheba, who gives him counsel, right? This is for the mother. But for the other side, like godly counsels, for example, because he followed the counsel of the kings of Israel, the house of Ahab, I should say. At this point, if you can remember in the Bible, like David, they have all these godly counsels, like the priest was their counselor, Solomon, something like that. And even with the good kings mentioned in Judah, they sought counsel from godly people, okay, from the Levites. from the people who really knows the law or the word of God. So that is another point in this king, that, aside from a good counsel, a godly counsel from a mother, a godly counsel from godly people as well. So this is his failure. So this is the summary of the kings of Judah. So let's move with the kings of Israel. So they have the same names, right? So turn, if you would, in First Kings chapter number 22. First Kings chapter number 22. So this is Ahaziah. Okay, so he's Ahaziah. Sorry, I haven't mentioned how he died. Sorry. So let's go back to Second Kings chapter number 8. So this is how he died, Ahaziah. Okay, I'll just give you a little snippet of it. So he was killed by Jehu. But I'm gonna focus later in the other king, Jihoram, because they died at the same time. So he died, he was slain by Jehu when he went to Israel. Okay, so that's how he died. Okay, so let's go to First King chapter number 22 for the sake of time. Okay, so let's see Ahaziah. So there is Ahaziah who reigned in Jerusalem, and there's another Ahaziah who reigned in Israel. So Ahaziah, king of Jerusalem, this Ahaziah who is king of Israel was his uncle. Because this Ahaziah was the brother of Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab. So don't make that confuse you, but there's no other easiest way to explain that thing. Okay, I'm gonna give you a family tree afterwards so that you won't be confused, but let's see. Okay, his reign is only 2 years. So it's quite interesting that the other Ahaziah reigned for 1 year, and the other Ahaziah reigned for 2 years only in Jerusalem. Well, you say that the word's short, but there's a king in Israel who reigned for only 7 days. So 1 year is not the shortest, but there's other guy, Zimri. So he reigned for 7 days. He only reigned for half the time of quarantine, right? So if you got quarantined in the years of Zimri, when you go out, there's another king because he only reigned for 7 days, right? So his reign is only 2 years. In First Kings chapter number 22, you're there. In verse number 40, so Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaziah his son reigned in his stead. So in verse number 51, so this is his reign. Ahaziah the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel in Samaria, the 7th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 2 years over Israel. So as I mentioned earlier, the co-regency and the co-principality. Imagine, Ahaziah did reign, but Jehoshaphat is still the king. But his nephew, Ahaziah, who is also named Ahaziah, is also reigning at that time. So that's why I said that Jehoshaphat and his son Jehoram did co-reign at that point. Okay, so that's his reign, 2 years. Okay, it doesn't mention in the Bible how old he was when he reigned. I searched, but I haven't found that. Okay, but his fault is this. Turn, if you would, in verse number 52. Okay, so this is his fault. So the Bible didn't mention anything about him longer than one chapter. He even just took about half a chapter in what we read earlier. Okay, so this is his fault. In verse number 52, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in the way of his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. For he served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked to anger the Lord God of Israel, according to all that his father had done. So basically, this is his fault. He sought counsel from the God of Eden. So he was sick because he fell in a lattice in his own house. So he was looking for cure, something like that. He asked counsel to Beelzebub. So basically, that's the God of the heathen. Okay? Well, you would say that, what about, well, wait a minute, they're already wicked. So obviously, they can't ask counsel from God. But, if they would ask counsel from God, maybe God could change his mind. Maybe he could heal him. Because, Ahab, he should have been punished long before. But since he repented, the judgment of God didn't happen in the days of Ahab, but in the days of his son. So God could always change his course of action if they would just humble themselves. But it says that he provoked God, okay, by asking counsel from Beelzebub. Okay, so this is what happened. So I won't go with the story of that, but that's a funny story. Where basically Elijah reproved him, and then he sent 50, and then that 50 was killed, another 50, and then later is uh, Elijah went with the last team of 50, and then he told him, okay, that what's happened. So this is uh, his end, okay? His fault is that he sought. So his end, Second Kings chapter number 1 in verse number 4. 1, 2 Kings chapter number 1, okay? Starting in verse number 1. Then Moab rebelled against Israel after the death of Ahab, and Ahaziah fell down through a lattice. So this is giving the story. In his upper chamber that was in Samaria, and was sick, and sent messengers and said unto them, Go inquire of Baal-zebub of the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover of this disease. But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, Arise, go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria, and say unto them, Is it not because there is not a God in Israel that ye go to inquire of Baal-zebub of the god of Ekron? Now therefore thus saith the Lord, Thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but shall surely die. And Elijah departed. So that's his end. So basically he died. Okay? So that's his end. Basically, he died of sickness. Okay? So what we can apply with this king, Ahaziah? Okay? So as saved individuals, sometimes we know that our faith for salvation is different with the faith how we live our lives daily, okay? When we are, being into the storms of life, sometimes our faith could falter, right? You know, the Bible is here, we can seek counsel from the Bible, and sometimes we seek counsel from the outside world. Because, we're humans, we're sinners, and sometimes we're tempted to do that. And sometimes, being overconfident, yeah, I know what the Bible says, but, as experience this works, something like that, so this is what I would follow. So at this point, he's sick, but yeah, let's ask for the other gods. Maybe the people of Akron, their God is really good at healing, something like that. But as for us, as I mentioned earlier, we're limited. Okay, God is always, delightful when we ask Him these things. And that's why the prayer is something like, we are not praying is because of the fact we're asking God to give us something. Because obviously, God already know what we want, what we need, as I should say. But prayer is something that we do. It's because of the fact that we pray to God and we trust Him that He will provide us with the prayer that we are asking Him. That's the purpose of prayer. It's not something like we ask, Lord, give me this thing. He already knows that. Okay? So at this point, maybe God also has plans for him to heal him, but he didn't ask God, he asked Baal-zebub, okay? The idol, okay? One of the example of this is King Asa, for example, one of great gods, the father of Jehoshaphat, okay? So he was sick, but he didn't, ask for God to heal him. But he he asked counsel from the physicians as well. So we can see from the Bible, great kings, good people that fall into this sin. And we have to be reminded about this thing as well. So that's his end, okay? So let's go to the next part. So as I mentioned, there is Ahaziah, there's Jehoram in the other side. This one is Ahaziah for the kings of Israel. And there is a Jehoram in the lineage of Ahab, the king of Israel, who did reign in Israel. So turn, if you would, in 2 Kings chapter number 1. 2 Kings chapter number 1, okay? So Jehoram, king of Judah, he is greedy for power and also having wicked counselors, and married the daughter of Ahab. That's his fault. Ahaziah, king of Judah, so he had basically a bad counselor, his mother, and the house of Ahab as a counselor. Ahaziah, king of Israel, he didn't trusted the Lord. He sought counsel to the God of the heathen. So let's see what is the fault as well of Jehoram, okay, king of Israel. So you're there in 2 Kings chapter number 1, right? So in verse number 17, so this is the our chapter. So he died according to the word of the Lord, which Elijah had spoken. So the person who died here is Ahaziah, his brother. And Jihoram reigned in his stead. So Jehoram did reign in his stead in the second year of Jehoram. So The second year of Jehoram, this is the king of Israel. The first Jehoram is mentioned, is his brother. Okay, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, because he had no son. So Ahaziah had no son. So basically, since he had no son, there is no crown prince. So the next to the reign is the next brother who is entitled to the kingdom. So at this point, Jehoram did reign in Israel. Okay, so just a few verses in verse number 3. Sorry, Second Kings chapter number 3. So move 2 chapters. Okay. So this is his reign. This is the record in the Bible. Second Kings chapter number 3 in verse number 1. Now Jehoram the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel in Samaria, the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 12 years in and reigned 12 years. So basically, this is quite a long reign. The other Jehoram as well, he reigned 8 years, and this one is 12 years. And he did even reach to the 18th year of Jehoshaphat. Now, Jehoshaphat reigned for about 25 years, so basically he has another 7 years who they did coincide with the reign of Jehoshaphat in the other side. Okay, so let's see what his fault is. So it doesn't even mention, it didn't also mention about his age when he did reign. It only mentions when he reigned and the length of his reign. Okay, Second Kings chapter number 2, you're still there. So in verse number 2, so this is his fault. And he wrought evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like his father and like his mother. For he put away the image of Baal that his father had made. Nevertheless, he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. He departed not therefrom. So basically, in the lineage of the kings of Israel, we can always see, or we can always judge, when the Bible says that he clave unto the sins of Jeroboam, that this king has failed. Because Jeroboam has started this thing of making a golden calf in the kingdom of Israel. So that's his fault. Okay, he followed, but he has some good things in him. He took away the image of Baal, but since it's the same idol. Okay, so he still failed. And also, this is one of the interesting parts actually, because this is the part where God proclaimed that, as I mentioned in my previous sermon, like God will be judging the house of Ahab. So he was the receiving end. So he has at his time was the judgment of God was given to the house of Ahab. So let's review that part. Okay. So this is his hand. So turn, if you would, 6 chapters later in 2 Kings chapter number 9. So as I mentioned earlier, I told you that I'll just give you an overview of how Ahaziah died, because I'm going to give I'm going to include Ahaziah at this point as well, because he died at the same time. Okay. So let's read this. It's quite a long chapter, but I'm going to read this fast just to give you an overview. So 2 Kings chapter number 9, starting in verse number 14. So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had kept Ramoth Gilead, he and all Israel, because Hazael king of Syria. But King Joram was returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael king of Syria. And Jehu said, If it be your minds, then let none of you go forth, nor escape out of the city to go tell it in Jezreel. So at this point, Jehu has been anointed to be the captain of Israel. So Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. So he was being healed in Jezreel, Joram, the king, that is. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, was come down to see Joram. So Ahaziah, the king of Israel, king of Judah went to Israel to visit his uncle, because his uncle got wounded in the battle at Ramoth Gilead. Okay, so verse number 16, let's see. So Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there, and Ahaziah king of Judah was come down to see Joram. Verse number 17, and there stood a watchman in the tower in Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu as he came, and said, I say company. And Joram said, Take an horseman and send to meet them, and let him say, Is it peace? So there went one of the horseback to meet him, and said, Thus saith the king, Is it peace? And Jehu said, What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, The messenger came to them, that he cometh not again. Then he sent out a second on horseback, which came to them, and said, Thus saith the king, Is it peace? And Jehu answered, What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, He came even unto them, and cometh not again. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously. And Joram said, Make ready. And his chariot was made ready, and Joram king of Israel and Ahaziah king of Judah went out, each in his chariot, and went out against Jehu, and met him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. And it came to pass, when Joram saw Jehu, that he said, Is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, What peace, so long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many? And Joram turned his hand and fled, and said to Ahaziah, so Ahaziah was there, the king of Judah, There is treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew a bow with his full strength, and smote Joram between his arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. Then said Jehu to Bidkar his captain, Take up and cast him in the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember how that when I and thou rode together after Ahab his father, the Lord laid this burden upon him. So that's what his end is. So he died from the hands of Jehu. So an arrow struck his heart. So that's the end of Jehoram, or Joram, the king of Israel. And also, Ahaziah was killed at this point. So Ahaziah is going to escape, but Jehu did kill him. And also, before I made a sermon, something like that, I know that there's a relationship between them, but I always find it like an overkill. Because, Jehu was only given the, he is given the task to, wipe out the house of Ahab, right? So basically, you would think that, it's just the king of Israel. So if the king of Judah was there, maybe he should be spared because he's the king of Judah. But as I was preparing this sermon, I realized that since they were related by blood, and since that was God's, commandment to Jehu, because he mentions that he's gonna slay all that piss it against the wall. As I mentioned in Elijah, that's what he said. So something like piss it against the wall refers to the males. Okay, so he's gonna take away all the males. So he's gonna cut them off. So that's one of the reasons why I think that he also killed Ahaziah at this point. So Ahaziah and Joram, his uncle, died at almost the same time, maybe a couple of hours later when he was escaping. So let's go there, okay? 2 Kings chapter number 10. So, just turn to chapter number 21 first. So let's see what's the proclamation at that point. So what did God said to Elijah about what will happen to the house of Jehu, so that we can see. So we have a little bit of time. So 2 Kings chapter number 21 in verse number 20. And Ahab said to Elijah, Hast thou found me, O mine enemy? And he answered, I have found thee. Because thou hast sold thyself to work evil in the sight of the Lord, behold, I will bring evil upon thee, and will take away thy posterity, and will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall. So that's what I mentioned earlier. And him that is shut up and left in Israel. I will make thine house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah, for the provocation wherewith thou hast provoked me to anger, and made Israel to sin. So he's gonna kill all him that pisseth against the wall, all the males. And this is not only Ahaziah himself from Judah, because in 2 Kings, turn, if you would, 9 chapters later. Okay, sorry. In 2 Kings chapter number 10, okay. 2 Kings chapter number 10, there's a story again that popped up at that point where he encountered the brothers of Ahaziah from Judah. They're going to visit Israel, and he also didn't spare them. He also killed them. Okay. 2 Kings chapter number 10, verse number 12. And he arose and departed and came to Samaria, and as he was at the shearing house in the way, Jehu met with the brethren of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and said, Who are ye? And they answered, We are the brethren of Ahaziah, and we go down to salute the children of the king and the children of the queen. And he said, Take them alive. And they took them alive and slew them at the pit of the shearing house, even 42 men, neither left he any of them. So basically, Jehu is being diligent of the task that God has given him. He killed all that is related to the house of Ahab. So that's God's judgment. You know, if He said that He's gonna wipe them off, then all of them would be wiped out. Okay. So that's the end of Jehoram. So he died at the same time with his uh, nephew Ahaziah from Judah. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna give you like a summary. So I made a little bit a chart to give you a little bit of overview. So it's quite small, but the blue ones is the kingdom of Judah, and this orange one is the kingdom of Israel, basically the house of Ahab. So this is Jehoshaphat and this is Ahab. Now, I only included the important individuals basically at this point. So this is Jihoram. This is the other Jihoram, brother-in-law to Jehoram of Israel, because he married Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab. This is not all the sons of Ahab. The other ones were killed because the Bible mentions he has 70 other sons. Okay? So this is his son, Ahaziah. So the kingdom of Israel passed through from father to son. But at the kingdom of, what I mentioned earlier is the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Israel did pass through from the father to son and to his brother, okay, Jehoram. And also what is interesting is that when Ahaziah died, Athaliah killed all the sons except Joash. So Athaliah did reign in Judah for almost 6 years. So that's why I told you it's quite interesting. That's why I made this chart to give you a simplification of what happened interchangeably. So basically, they got married, so they were related legally. So son-in-law of the house of Ahab. And this guy here, Ahaziah, was the nephew of the two kings of the kingdom of Israel. Okay, so that's basically the summary of these kings and what they made interesting, and also they have the same names and they all have failed. Okay, so turn if you would in 1 Kings chapter number 22. 1 Kings chapter number 22. In verse number 1, and they continued 3 years without war between Syria and Israel. And it came to pass in the third year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said unto his servants, Know ye that Ramoth Gilead is ours, and we be still, and take it not out of the hand of the king of Syria? And he said unto Jehoshaphat, Wilt thou go with me to battle to Ramoth Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as thou art, my people as thy people, my horses and thy horses. So this is the fault of Jehoshaphat, basically, in the intro of this sermon. So as saved individuals, when it comes to our life on this earth, we are subject to higher standards. So we are higher standards. That's why we are limited with our options. It's because of the fact that we are subject to higher standards by God. And, we know that we are saved and we cannot lose our salvation. But as I mentioned earlier, we should be careful with the relationships that we have with the unsaved, especially with the wicked. Okay? So we have to be careful. As we see a single affinity made by Jehoshaphat to the king of Israel, if you would notice, this almost eventually did wipe out the lineage of the kingdom of Judah. Because twice in a row, all the sons were killed. Jehoram killed all his brothers, and all the sons of Jehoram as well were killed, and they only left with one. And Athaliah attempted to kill all the king's sons, but there's one left, that is Joash. See, it's like TV show where the youngest always survives when the perpetrator kills all the family, something like that. Maybe they got that from the Bible. But a simple affinity, something like that, almost did wipe out. And also, it messed up. It's like two reigns in the kingdom. Kingdom of Judah got wicked. Okay? And then, Joash came down. Even Jehoiada had to teach him all these things. Because, the standards have been out in Judah, something like that. And, Jehoash also failed when Jehoiada died, but they have to bring back all these things, so that the the house of Judah could go back on track when it comes to serving God. So that's why we have to be careful with that simple mistake, okay, that we saw earlier. So as we close, turn if you would in Psalm 123. Okay, Psalm 123. So this is our closing verse, Psalm 123. So this is a good thing. Actually, it is an encouraging thing for us. Psalm 123. Sorry, 25, verse number 3. Psalm 125, verse number 23, verse number 3. For the rod of the wicked shall not rest upon the lot of the righteous, lest the righteous put forth their hands unto iniquity. So wickedness, the rod of wickedness will not go inside the church, lest the people in this church hold the rod of iniquity. So that's an encouraging verse, because if we can just keep ourselves within the bounds of our boundaries, okay, the righteousness that is, the lot of the righteous that is, you know, the rod of iniquity will not come inside, but it's still in our hands. That's why we have to be reminded all this time, sermons about sins, sermons how to grow in church, something like that. Those sermons will never get away inside the church. You'll hear them almost every time, because almost every time we have people, they just got in here, they think they're honest within themselves, they want to serve God. They have to be reminded, especially our church. We have young people in our church as well. They have to be reminded. This verse is really, really, encouraging, because if you would stay in the bounds of righteousness, the lot of the righteous, wickedness will not come inside there unless you go out and took the rod of the wickedness. Let's close. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity given me to preach tonight in our Wednesday night Bible study. Lord, I pray you would help us, to learn these, faults that these kings did, especially the kings of Judah, Lord. I pray you would help us to apply this in ourselves, and also remind us always, Lord, to keep our bounds, especially with the relationships we made with the outside world. And also, Lord, help us encourage, especially to raise godly children, give them godly counsels, and also hearken to godly counsels from godly people as well. Help us, Lord, as we go with our separate ways tonight, and bring us back in our Sunday services. Just name we pray. Amen.
Amen. For the last song, song number 90 on your hymnals, song number 9.